Hello, everyone. This is another Freedom to Feel conversation, and my guest today is Rabbi Alon Ferency. He's a creativity consultant, counselor, and coach, a cross-country bicyclist, Peace Corps volunteer, author, concert producer, chaplain, and Belgian master. There's more to Rabbi Alon, and the full bio will be at the end of this interview. And we'll be discussing, I'll be asking you lots of questions about what he does and how he does it and everything else in between. So my first question to you, thank you so much for being here, Alon. And
thank you for having me.
Question that I love asking my guests, for some reason, it's always my initial question, is how would you introduce yourself as of this moment? Who are you?
How do I introduce myself is a little different than who I am. But who I am first is probably someone who likes to laugh. I think my friend says that everyone thinks they're funny. I can't promise I'm funny, but I know that I like to laugh.
Yeah.
I'm someone who's getting much more comfortable with my own mistakes. I've always been good at hearing and always worked to be a better listener. I was successful academically, but had to learn emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Seeking wisdom. And I think my big learning now, aside from picking up playing drums, is how to bring the kindness and generosity I have in my work to my own family. I find pastors, rabbis, priests can be incredibly kind and generous and patient with their congregants and clients, and their children and their spouses get the least of that. So I'm trying to bring that home more often. That's my work, aside from what I do professionally.
Yes. What is a vulnerable God? What's vulnerable God to you as of now? I know you have written.
So I wrote this in 2008, probably, and it started with a process of working in a LA County hospital.
Yeah.
As a Jew, I was observing Latino Catholics in LA County Hospital going through real dire circumstances and feeling, in Spanish they would say, I'm in Jesus's hands. And I thought, I wish I could feel that way. And so I did a lot of excavating and research into my tradition to find experiences where God felt close at hand.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of experiences of God. If we remove the patina of God's perfection and we remove the idea of providence, that God is steering, manipulating, turning the gears of our lives, and we understand God as someone or a thing, an experience that knows and loves us, but can't protect us always, much more like a shepherd than some sort of perfect separate being, it's a lot more relatable.
Right.
It's a lot more capable of prayer. It's a lot more capable of feeling nested within that experience of God. And then in the 15-ish years since I wrote that, some parts of my theology have evolved. The sense of an intimate connection to the created world and understanding my smallness in it, and that being both terrifying and liberating, being like a part of a cell in a giant universal body and feeling that all of this is both absurd and incredibly beautiful.
Wow.
So that's probably roughly where my theology is now, somewhat more, I'm very hesitant to use the word mystic, but transcending some of the original religious particularism that I had and more into a sense of feeling part of the universal body of God.
Wow. And what would that translate into when it comes to daily living? Can you give me an example?
Well, that's definitely what's evolving, right? So it's been 2 years since I stepped down from the pulpit rabbinate. And when you are in a pulpit, I assume this is true for Christians, Muslims, Taoists, there are structures in place. You have a daily, weekly, annual practice. And so to have that removed has been, I suppose, a bit of a difficult and grieving process. And now it's filled with a lot of time alone, a lot of quiet, a lot of stillness, long walks without my phone, as much time as possible without a screen. I don't know if that's a spiritual practice or just a good mental health practice. But I keep coming back to those verses from Psalms to be still and know God, and that in silence there is praise. So really just time sitting on my front stoop, looking at the cars go by. Maybe too much time. I don't know if you can become addicted to meditation. It's a risk.
You just mentioned about, be still to know I am God. I have heard that. And I of course, and there's a book, I think, written that's the title to one of my guests, I believe she wrote. But, I'm a student of Vedanta, and they said quite the opposite. They say, know God and then be still. Once you know what God is, then, and basically knowing God's knowing you.
I mean, in the original Hebrew, probably verbs have an odd placement in a sentence. So you probably, I'd have to go look back at the scripture. I bet you could read it both ways. It's certainly a cycle, right? The stunned silence of awe and introspection, leading one to understand God better, but then being made aware of holiness and mystery and being stunned into submission from that, right?
Yes.
It's a nice cycle to be in.
Yes. Yeah. I love that, what you just said, a cycle. So it could be, in a way, there's no rules, right, Alon? There's no really, it's not linear, the process of spiritual wisdom or spiritual awakening. There's no really one way to do it, or one path, or a specific way to find that, to get to those deep understandings. I feel, and I have heard enough times that to be said. Is that something that you sort of agree with from your experience?
Well, in fairness to colleagues and pastors and priests and imams who have a very clear, discrete, particular dogma, faith system, and historical understanding, I think there are many truths.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have become less dogmatic and less particular as I age, but I am deeply rooted in my own faith system and the history of my people, in our literature and experience. But I also think James Baldwin knew the truth. I think some of the scriptures, Christian scriptures, are deeply meaningful. There are Muslim Sufi poems that are touchstones for me. Shakespeare had a truth. And I as you may show my website, Eclectic Cleric, I think the eclectic as a way of study is important, right? To grasp from Jackson Pollock and Pedro Almodovar and the poetry of T.S. Eliot and the writings, as I mentioned, of James Baldwin and Cormac McCarthy, and novels and film and scripture and ritual. Yeah, for me, it's a very eclectic but I don't want to offend or diminish those who find a deep satisfaction and capacity within a single stream.
Right.
That's just not where I am now. And I don't think I'll ever be back in that stream, which is a little hard to say. It nurtured me for so long. And now to kind of break those boundaries is a little hard to admit.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It takes courage, doesn't it? You talk about something that I never heard. I think creative courage. That was something that really caught my attention too. And creativity, the idea of creativity being something related to truth, our own truth, the expression of one's truth. So all that is interconnected. It's amazing how life, it's very clear. It's not just one thing. It seems to be this multiplicity of everything that we can perceive and understand. That's something that I really didn't, I couldn't grasp when I was trying to look through the lens of Christianity or the Catholics. I was born a Catholic. And I remember trying to see God from those lenses and or life, the nature of what's God out there. And I couldn't really find it was never clear to me for so many years. And now it feels like it's much clearer in a sense that God is something that doesn't change.
So I think for me to have an intimate relationship with God, and circling back to the idea of vulnerable God, it does imply that God is changing and evolving. There's experiences in Hebrew Bible of God, if not apologizing, regretting God's decisions, right? Which is which is not the action of a perfect deity to regret that I made these humans. God, if perfect and eternal and unchanging, would have understood what God was getting into. So the idea of God also being a learner as we are, what is important to me? I'm not sure I believe that there's anything that's unchanging. I'd have to think about that. I mean, I think there is beauty, there is truth, and some of that is mediated by the moment in time, and some of it is deeper. But I don't know, the image that keeps coming up today is a flowing river, right? That it is flowing, not stoppered. So I'm not sure I can agree with you right now that there is something eternal. All of it is eternal, but at the same time, even the physics of the universe is that it is both eternal and eternally changing.
So that's very clear to me. And you probably have heard, I'm sure you have heard that, so many artists, amazing artists that have created incredible art. And when you ask them, what was the inspiration? How did you create this amazing piece of whatever it is? They would say, it was not me. It just was something, it was through me. It was as if I was just being the vehicle, just the
antenna,
the instrument, right?
Yeah.
To something. Yeah. So, yeah.
I believe that. And also I think it diminishes the incredible amount of work that goes into arts making, right? To be the antenna, to be the recipient requires a lot of polishing of the material, and polishing of self and skills such that you can translate the music immediately when it's received through your hands, right? Or have the sense of color to put it on a palette as quickly as you receive it, right. Or know even that it needs to be edited, right? That wasn't exactly God's voice, that God's voice is more in the right corner, a little more red, a little more yellow, a little to the left. And then also the harder part about this being just sort of a revelation and epiphany is that it's also discrete, right? I think this might be heretical to say, but if scripture was written down in a particular place by particular men, usually men, eventually it had to be written down, right? The line at Saturday Night Live was, right. The sketches don't go on because they're ready. They go on because it's Saturday night. And eventually the art has to be made concrete and specific. And I don't think that God is concrete and specific. So we're taking these slivers, these snapshots of holiness and experience and mystery, and putting them to canvas or lyrics. But again, as you pointed out, God is just a word for a thing. God is not the thing. Right? To quote Pete Holmes, who's quoting someone else, that God is just the name of the blanket that we put over the mystery to give it shape. And I think art does that too. Art is like trying to make concrete or specific some broader mystery that is inexplicable. Yeah. And sometimes art is just for fun. I think it's okay to write a dance song that's just about joy. Yeah. To be specific to your work. That it's just about a good laugh. Those two are divine. So. Yeah.
In what I do almost every day, I have, it's not really a ritual. It's just spontaneously, I just burn like a piece of sage. And then I keep looking at the smoke just going up. And that to me is the dance of God. And it's almost like seeing the entire universe and seeing the dance of being human. In that moment, the smoke could just transform into all these amazing shapes and forms and disappearing. It just comes and goes, and it's beautiful. It's moving beautifully.
Hard to hold on to. Yeah. Like God, just impossible to hold on to. Yeah. So with this, the fancy word for what you described, I believe, is panentheism, that God is all there is and more. That we are existing within God, but God is not only us. What in your sort of sense of the divine and spiritual, what happens after this life?
Yes, this is something that I really didn't want to for so long to contemplate or even explore. That I wanted to live as it is, if it is a mystery. But then, because I'm a student of Vedanta, what they really focus on is knowing our own nature, that we never die, that this very experience in this moment of being the observer, being aware, being aware in itself, pure awareness, that's what they call it. That's the true reality. That's absolute reality. That will never end, because you will always be aware of something, and that which is aware of something, it's what we are, not who, but what.
And can you access that level of awareness, or is that intended to be beyond the human?
Oh no, that's the brilliant thing about the studies within Vedanta. It's very scientific in that sense, that it's accessible to everyone. Like right now, we are aware of something. I'm aware of my own voice, this conversation here, you, the image on my screen. So it's something that I'm experiencing, but it's not what I am. What I am, it's kind of and it's not even that's behind, it's just that's the ground, really. It's the essence of experience, is the stage of experience.
It sounds like there's also questions of, I think psychologists would call it metacognition, like awareness of our own mind's action.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Judaism, but what I have read from you in the Vulnerable God, that really resonated with the teachings of Vedanta. It's very close. And I have studied Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Christianity. But they didn't really answer my questions. I had too many questions, and it was just limited. And they can't be the heaven idea, or it's so many ideas that didn't resonate. But then Vedanta is the only one now that it's really, something in me says, this is true. And I don't know why. It's very intuitive. I can't know why.
I was on a podcast about music, and sometimes an album comes to you at just the right moment in your life, and you don't know why, and you can't put your finger on it.
Yeah.
Thoughts, dreams, visions, theology. I think a thing you would like about Judaism, were you to study it, is that our answer to a question is usually another question. And as someone pointed out, Jews are much more comfortable with paradox than most. Right? So it's very rare, for example, in one of our sacred texts, the Talmud, for a question to get definitively answered. They parse and drive down deeper into narrower and more specific parts of the question. But the answer is often postponed as far as possible. So I don't know if you need that kind of significance and certainty, but for me, it's liberating. And for a lot of the people I work with, it's quite liberating to know that they don't have to have an answer. Right? That it is good to have a question, and it is good to deepen the questions, and that level of doubt and curiosity is actually a part of faith. And certainly a part of art making. I mean, a good question can lead to an incredible song, an incredible sculpture.
That is so true. Yes, and maybe that's why I'm always asking questions, and they never ended. I was kind of, in a way, hoping that that day would come, a day of silence, and that's it. But I think there's something about also fun. It's playful for the mind. That's a dance that I love engaging with. It's just, asking questions and then listening. Like the same question you just asked me, through the lens of Judaism, what's the purpose of life, and what happens after we die?
Those are very small questions that are very easily answered.
Yes, yeah. I know.
I mean, I think with any good faith tradition, any faith leader would have to be honest enough to say, I'm going to give you my answer, not the answer from my religion, my faith.
Yeah.
I'm going to work backwards. So there is, this is why art is so deeply meaningful to me. I think art can answer in image and in experience things that essay and theology and scripture cannot.
Right.
So there's that scene at the end of Blade Runner about all the things I've experienced that will be lost to, like tears and rain. And the movie that comes up for me again and again, I rewatched it recently, is Sunshine by Danny Boyle, where it's a science fiction narrative about astronauts trying to reignite a dying sun. And it ends with Cillian Murphy's very young, very handsome Cillian Murphy his character is engulfed in the sun and returns to the stars, much like the body electric and the musical Fame. Yeah. And so I think for me, what I understand is that we return to, you and I are separate in this moment, but beyond this life, we will return to stardust and be not separate from each other, nor from deeper knowledge, nor particular to one place, but part of the trees and part of the air and part of the universe in a more broad sense. Mm. Traditionally, Jewishly, there's also a sense of increased awareness after this life, that all the secrets become revealed. I wasn't there when it happened, but my aunt, when she was dying, do you know what a rain stick is? Is that a thing? It's a long stick that has, if I explain how it works, it ruins the story, but it makes rain sounds. You tip it and it makes rain sounds. And my mother and her sister were looking at it as she was dying. And my mother said, "Oh, I wonder how it works." And Anne, my aunt, said, "Soon I will know and you won't." You know, so I think there is a coming of knowledge. I think Jewishly, the purpose of life is probably simpler. And it's more or less what the Stoics of Rome would have said. Just be a decent person. Just be fundamentally decent. True to your word. Don't gossip. Don't take more than you need. Live a life of rigor. Study. Learn. Care for family. Care for community. Give to charity. Do the right thing. You know, and that being a decent person isn't really that hard. We all kind of know what it means to be not a jerk. Right. I mean, that's more the Stoics than Judaism, but I think a lot of the actions of Judaism are designed to inculcate a sense of responsibility towards the other and a sense of self-discipline, you know, right action, right speech. And doing not, you know, the line in Bible this week, Jews read from a lectionary, so a cycle of biblical readings is, you shouldn't do what's right in your eyes. Right? It's chaos if everyone does what their own actions, their own desires, right? There is something broader than us that we need to be accountable to. So purpose in life, yeah. I mean, I think, quote, the Greeks, you know, to leave the world better than we found it.
Yeah. For me, it has been the understanding that everything is happening in God, and so everything is God. So by looking at you, looking in everything around me, I care for my house, I care for everything. It seems to be coming from that place since I have come across this understanding and establishing myself in these teachings, to become more like a realization of truth and not just the understanding, the intellectual understanding of truth. So, and it has changed. And it's something that I noticed that it happens. I don't have to try as hard. It's kind of automatically kindness arises. And I see, you know, the body, mind doing things that it didn't used to be that way. So it's something in me kind of observes the difference, you know.
Aging is also nice, you know, so you take care of your back and your joints. The rest of aging is very nice. It's nice to be calmer and to strive towards wisdom and to be more grateful and more proud of what we have.
Yes.
Yeah. The frantic and frenetic being 20 and driven by impulse and desire was exhausting and very lonely.
Yes. Yeah. I feel the same way. Yes. Well, I think you mentioned trauma, didn't you? Is that the video that, most of my life has been informed by trauma. The cloud over my head of always seeing life from the lens of a child that had been hurt. So that was so painful. Yes, and maybe that's why the interest of knowing the nature of suffering and why we hurt one another and why I had been hurt as a child. You know, what have I done to deserve that? All these questions. And then, you know, the more I investigated that through the lens of Buddhism and Vedanta, then it became more clear to me that's not really, it's the law of cause and effect. But then the more you go, you know, if you go deeper into it, we don't really know the truth behind all that. What's the first action? What started first? You know, how do we know really how? So in the end, the dreamlike reality really makes more sense. in a reality that doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think this question of what have I done is misleading, though. I mean, that's a shaming kind of question. Yeah. I think the world is, to quote Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a psychologist, the world was not created to answer our needs, right? If we remove the assumption that things were supposed to be a certain way and we did something to break that, and just understand the world is fragile and delicate and enormous and broken, and we are broken, and that is in our nature to be flesh and bone and blood, and just to be grateful for what good does come, and to understand that bad news is always possible. Yes. I certainly got good. We have an illness in our family, extended family, and when I had to tell my children about it, I realized I've become very good at telling people bad news, and part of it is over a career of working with people in painful situations. I don't anticipate not having bad news in life. Right? That life will have sorrow and immense joy and a lot of neutral spaces that are kind of boring.
Yes.
And then fun and laughter and tears. And I wouldn't give up on any of them, but I don't think you did anything wrong. Right? I think that's a kind of self-punishing. We live in a world with a lot of hurt and a lot of cruelty, and we perpetrate some of that cruelty. I mean, I've been, perpetrator too, and a victim.
Yeah.
And eventually I just moved on and thought, I'm going to make the best of what I have, and nothing will be perfect. And then you saw that in my writing, that if you take away the idea of God as perfect, it's a huge relief.
Yes.
And then for me, the joy is so often in the arts, beautiful music, beautiful painting.
Yes. What would you choose if you had the choice of being nothing or being something?
I would choose a few decades at least of existence. I think this world is pretty magical, and I want to be part of it for as long as possible. I can imagine coming to an end of it and being okay. But there's so much to do, and so much to read, and so much to see, and so much to love, and so many people to meet, conversations to have. I mean, I imagine in the world to come, I'll get to meet Jimi Hendrix and see my grandfather again. But in this world, I want to experience a lot and hold on to it and savor it as much as possible. Even knowing that it can't last, and that's inherent. I mean, I don't know if you've ever watched the show What We Do in the Shadows. It's a show about vampires. So one of the vampires says, I'm going to take a little break and do some reading. Yeah. And his human familiar says, how long do you think you'll be? He says, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. And if you're immortal, your choices don't matter. How you spend your time is irrelevant, because you'll always have enough. And so having a limited lifespan makes our choices significant and powerful, and we have to use our time well. I mean, if you ask what the Jewish reason to have a life of purpose and decency is, it's because life is short and you should use your time well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these moments are precious. Every time I take a nap, I feel, I do enjoy napping, but it does feel like, what am I supposed to do with each moment?
Yes.
I'm trying not to get paralyzed by that, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things that it has helped me a lot, it's with my husband and my dog and my family members and everybody else, is just seeing them again, going back to that very contemplative way of seeing them. I just see them as an expression of God, even an imperfect one, not knowing itself, God not knowing itself. So that has just changed everything. It just, a lot of times, instead of being upset, there's a smile, and I just smile and I just look at as like the smoke again, it's just passing. It's something that's coming and going. How beautiful.
You're lucky to do that. I can do that by moments, but not consistently. To be that open-minded about my family and my day-to-day experience is much harder.
Yes, it is a practice, isn't it, Alon?
Yeah.
I have found that to be my practice. So the more I do it, the more the mind gets used to that pattern, and then it goes back to it. It's almost like going back to the spiritual mind, spiritual wisdom every time. And it's not easy. Yeah. Sometimes there's a fight and then it doesn't really want to do it. But then I'm very patient, so I think that helps. I'm extremely patient.
I can be quite impatient. That's interesting. That's a good trait for you. Congratulations.
Yes. And I don't even, I don't even know if I can take that, the praise, because I don't know where it came from. It's had been always this way since I was little, so I have no idea. Yeah. So, but thank you for saying that, recognizing that too, acknowledging that. So going back to your work, so you do, oh gosh, I have so many things here. So your services, one-on-one workshops, retreats for individuals and institutions. And then you offered a free 30-minute conversation, which is wonderful. I'll have your website link here.
Eclectic cleric. Yeah, I thought it was very catchy, and it turns out it's very hard to say.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying it for me. So I'll have that in a clickable way. And I love that your service is also available in French, Hebrew, and Spanish as well.
Poorly. I used to be fluent in those languages. Now it's very rusty. Yeah.
And you also, I like this in that page, the services page. You say, I believe that Judaism is a practice that transforms heart, mind, and spirit, and a sacred journey of self-exploration and service. I had to have this here as a note. It just caught my attention in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
Mind, heart, mind, and spirit. So, gosh, we're almost at the end, and I made so many notes. You have no idea.
You're welcome to follow up. I will field your questions at another time when one-on-one if you need it. I love a good question. There is a Yiddish aphorism that a good question is half an answer. So yeah.
Yes. So at the end, I wanted to ask you this question. So this platform is titled "The Freedom to Feel." For a reason, from my own perspective. But how do you understand this concept of freedom? What is freedom to you?
Oh, wow. Oh, there's so many ways to think about that. I mean, politically, I look at what they call politically negative freedom, freedom from restriction, freedom from oppression, having lived in oppressive societies, freedom from corruption, freedom from political repression. Judaism doesn't care that much about autonomy. Judaism cares about our responsibility to each other, which is often in American political philosophy called positive freedom, the freedom to have, the freedom to give, the freedom to have healthcare or education. How do I understand freedom, especially as a spiritual perspective?
Yeah.
It's disavowing, letting go of things, I think, is really important to me. Letting go of the cravings and the need and the addictions and the compulsions and the desires that go way beyond what we need. Divestment is the word I was looking for. Letting go of having less, taking less.
Yes.
It's weird. I've never actually thought about it in that framework, but that is to me a kind of freedom. When I was, after college, I rode my bicycle cross country with a few friends, and you have 4 saddlebags, 2 on each wheel. You had very little. We had maybe 4 changes of clothes, some gear, granola, some water, a tent. And you realize we never did this, but at any point we could just take a left or a right turn because we had everything we needed on our bike. And that was a freedom, to have little and to feel like it was enough. And to be able to go left, right, in any direction you want without fear. And then and I have 4 boys and a long, thriving marriage. There's a different kind of freedom, a freedom of security that I couldn't just take a left turn quickly. But it's worth the trade. Loving people, whether it's family or clients or congregants or friends. Maybe you diminish a certain kind of freedom, but it's so deeply enriching that I don't miss it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Really beautiful. Gosh. Thank you so much for being you.
Thank you. Thank you for being so open and in this exchange.
Wow, it's beautiful. Thank you so much again, Rabbi Alon, and
thank you.
We'll be in touch again.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Bye for now. Thank you.